Michelle, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today and coming on here to have this conversation with me. When we touched offline, I talked about the whole art of alchemy and why I find that fascinating. But obviously, my understanding is very limited. So I'm hoping to learn from you today, and hopefully we can share those learnings with the listeners as well. So before we jump into it, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, what it is that you do, and what's brought you here today.
Awesome. Thank you, Furkan. I'm really happy to be here. And yes, I hope this is helpful to your audience, particularly as people are grappling with how to make changes in their lives and grappling with transformation in light of current world situations.
Mhm.
This is something that I'm very excited and passionate about, is how to anchor into ancient wisdom traditions that are based in universal truth, because that which is based in universal truth is universally applicable. My background is in a combination of spirituality and science. I began studying and practicing shamanism in 2003 when I was 15 years old. So I was in high school. And it just always made sense to me. It's, oh, here's this animistic worldview that gives me a vocabulary for everything I already knew to be true about the world and about everything is alive and everything is connected through this aliveness. And we can be in respect and reverence and collaboration and relationship with that. And it just, again, made so much sense to me. I felt like I was coming home when I came across shamanism. So I continued my studies in shamanism. And keep in mind, back then, this is the early 2000s. Now you can just Google shaman near me. So I definitely had to, go through the network of referrals and bounce around from here to there when I found people who were aligned with that. And then I continued my studies during university. I went through the science department. So my degree is in biology, and I did my undergrad research in hummingbird foraging behavior. And as I'm sure you can imagine, hanging out in the science department, there's a lot of people who are poo-pooing the whole spiritual, animistic consciousness of life. And I definitely found that to be the case. So it was a really interesting opportunity for me to anchor into my conviction, both as a scientist and as a spiritual practitioner. I really do. I love both. I really love both the schools and the disciplines of science and also of spiritual practice. And I do believe that they are two means of investigating these same universal truths, and they both belong. And so I continued my studies in energy healing and mediumship in many different disciplines of energy medicine and practice. And then I came across alchemy and realized that was, again, another homecoming of, oh, here's this language for what I'm already doing. This is, I think, and again, it was this, oh, here's the thing that you're already doing, and here's the language for it and the cultural and historical context behind it. And it really, again, illuminated for me both everything that I was already devoted to and everything that I already felt in terms of the spirit of life and the science of life belonging together. Alchemy is both a spiritual and a scientific discipline. And also the connectedness of all things, the macrocosm and the microcosm. And we have this very commonly paraphrased principle that actually comes from alchemy when people talk about as above, so below. That's actually referring to one of the ancient principles of alchemical philosophy and practice. And again, it's thrown around, not quite used exactly correctly, but as most commonly paraphrased things are. But seeing, once you know about alchemy and once you know what it is and what it's done, you see it everywhere. And it's this really fascinating thing that, oh, this very ancient, like thousands upon thousands of years old spiritual and scientific tradition has permeated throughout our culture in both the fantastical pop culture fictional realms, but also in the disciplines of modern medicine and physics and chemistry and science, and so much of what we don't necessarily view as mystical today, which is one of the reasons I love it so much. It's very practical in its philosophy.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. And it is as you were sharing that, what was coming to me is it is a bit intuitive too, right? Because you hear about even shamans like in the Amazon forest, when they're doing psychedelics and preparing ayahuasca, they had to figure out how to mix these plants. And how do you figure that out? So I think there's an aspect of having this intuition. So I'm just curious to understand from your perspective, how has this ancient practice been handed down? And is it something that you just know that you have a calling for it, and then you obviously tend to practice it from there?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. When you're asking how is this ancient practice handed down, to your point about the shamans you're talking about like the Amazon and
Yeah.
mixing the plants of ayahuasca and
Yeah.
chacruna, right? And I think that's a really great example and
Mhm.
I've thought about that of how did they know how
Yeah.
to do that? That's so fantastical. And even all of the plant medicines, like how did people come about this knowledge? And
Mhm.
I think it's a combination of trial and error can only get you so far. Like
Right.
someone's going to eat that thing and die, and then someone's going to eat this thing and but they put all sorts of drops in the eyes. It's really like a very specific medicinal practice. And I think there definitely is this aspect of mediumship, of direct transmission from the spiritual forces that are working with, in the case that you're talking about, the plant medicines,
Mhm.
and then also alchemy. I think there is this direct transmission aspect that is so profound. And in our modern Western world, we're pretty removed from that because we have a lot of emphasis on, oh, education comes from reading books and learning from people. And I think that's part of it too. But there's also this other aspect of education of how did people originally receive ideas and how did people originally learn things was through direct lived experience and direct contact with the mysteries.
Mhm.
And that's something that we don't really have a context for in our society of we're on our phones all the time. We're, inundated with stimulus. And there's also this whole like system conditioning of surrendering our authority, surrendering our direct contact with earth and with spirit and all of, so many problematic things that set us up to not actually be in contact with our direct transmission
Mm.
state that our ancestors were. So I think it is a combination of the ancient alchemists, like somebody got this from somewhere at some point. This didn't come from nowhere. So I think the direct spiritual forces and then also teaching by transmission and storytelling, I think that's a huge part of this as well. And I
Mhm.
look at my own spiritual education. I have been so fortunate to have mentors pretty much fall in my lap at the perfect time that they were
Mhm.
supposed to come into my life. And I really firmly believe that this is how this has happened historically. And now people are like, there's a lot more information online and people can take courses. Not all of it's good.
Mhm.
That's a whole other
Yeah.
podcast episode there of discernment with our teachers and our influences.
Yes.
And yet there's this ancient transmission when it comes to mystery school spiritual technology. It's a very intuitive and very, very direct thing that I think is initially hard for people to trust because it's trained out of us.
Mhm.
But it's there and it's real.
Yeah. Thank you for that as well. So help us understand what alchemy is, because, like I said, my understanding is limited, but I'm assuming there's a lot of people who don't fully appreciate it, as you
Mhm.
shared earlier too. So if
Yeah.
you're able to give us a high level understanding of what this ancient art is, and then we can talk about some of the practicality behind it in today's world.
Certainly. Yeah, a high level understanding and then translating that into practicality. A lot of people see the word alchemy thrown around, particularly in the spiritual and
Mhm.
personal development community, and it tends to people substitute it in as a word of transformation or something like going through a process. And that's kind of right, but not really. And then
Mhm.
also it tends to mean something as like mysterious and vaguely expensive is the context that we see it a lot. And in pop culture, we have this understanding of alchemy as the process of turning lead into gold. And while that is not technically inaccurate, it is a woefully inadequate understanding of what this process actually is. And it is in simplest terms, the process by which one transforms any base material
Mhm.
through this evolution, this transmutation into its most elevated illuminated form, as in lead to gold. And yet, remember, when we're looking at alchemy, it's this universally applicable process that we can apply to our relationships, to our own health,
Mm.
to our careers, to our consciousness, to our own beingness. And also on the global scale, we can apply these principles. Like I'm looking around right now, we're recording this November 11. I don't know when it's going to be released. And I know you're in Canada, but here in the US, we're still going through this really like intense
Yeah.
and like mind-bogglingly just, I don't know, shitstorm of an election experience.
Mhm.
And I'm looking at this through the lens of alchemy, of here we are in the throes of this alchemical transmutation process. And so we can even apply it on the large scale happenings that we see in the world and
Yes.
on the social and societal levels. And when I look at, okay, here's this very logical, very practical system of understanding transformation, I view this is the single most valuable tool I have ever come across for both personal transformation, for people's individual journey of trauma, healing, and reconciliation, and making sense of their own life circumstances, again, through the personal lens, but then also through the societal, the we are and the all is of our
Mhm.
own collective evolution and transmutation of consciousness. And I just want to get everybody on the page of alchemy. It's so helpful
Mhm.
in the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So perhaps then using the parallel as you touched on earlier in the personal development side, what does alchemy do if we were to apply it in our lives, right? So obviously you're not practicing the ancient art, but how can you practice the teachings of alchemy life as you're looking for growth, or as you said, transmutation, or just transformation in general as you're
Yeah.
going about it? What are some of the things people keep in mind? Because there's a lot of resistance to change, I see. And then when things do get difficult, when you experience pressure, because a lot of times when you're trying to change, there's going to be pushback, whether it's people or just your own habits getting in the way. So then how do you overcome those obstacles as well? Because that's part of the process. You want to get a better understanding around that as well.
Yes. You put a lot of questions in there, so I'll try to break it down a little
Sure.
bit. So what was the first part about people aren't practicing the ancient art, but how are we applying this in our personal process? Is
Yeah,
that the first part?
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So I would actually argue people are practicing the ancient art because and I guess I can only say that as far as I know as a
Yeah.
modern incarnate person, right? And yet from what I have gathered in my studies over the years is the whole melting down metals thing is one little tiny facet
Mhm.
of the alchemical practice. And there are alchemists that worked with health and being. So let's just break down the root of the word. Alchemy is the same as chemistry. So there
Mm.
were alchemists who were essentially asking questions about what is life, what is the nature of consciousness, and from there doing experiments in their lab to break down matter into its base form, which is why we have the periodic table now. And we have modern medicine, again, thanks to alchemists working within the systems of the body. The ancient alchemists are essentially like asking questions. And this is why it overlaps so well with science of what is life? What is consciousness? Who are we? Why are we here? What are we made of? What is this made of? And what is the most elevated potential of myself, of the world? And I
Mhm.
think we're asking those same questions now. We're asking, who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing?
Yeah.
And what is life? What is consciousness? So I would argue, yeah, we're still doing that. And our tools have changed and
Yeah.
the context has certainly changed. And yet the underlying principles, this is the thing about that which is based in universal truth, is it's always going to be true.
Mhm.
And we just get to ask those same questions and have those same inquiries through the ages and our evolving understanding. So the ancient alchemists, it wasn't just about doing things in the lab of melting down metals and analyzing materials. It was a very personally involved process, and it was impossible to separate the alchemist from the experiment. And
Mhm.
so you look at the ancient mystic teachings are about involving one's consciousness in the process of transmutation. And the alchemist sat for hours in meditation, in contemplation and reflection, and participating actively and very intimately with whatever they were doing as the external representation of that process. And ultimately, whatever they were doing externally was really it's a vehicle for the internal process.
Mhm.
So I look at now and I developed and I teach a 200-hour alchemy certification training. So this is something that I dive very deeply into with my students. And it's a year-long deep dive apprenticeship. It's so fun. It's awesome. But we're not melting down metals in the kitchen, but we are going very deeply into this process of contemplation and study, both with the internal experience of that transmutation in our own trauma, our own beliefs, our own concept of self. And then also, okay, how are we in the world? The world is the lab, and our lives are the lab, our intimate relationships, our careers, our everything, really.
Mhm.
And so then it becomes this process of applying the principles and the teachings of alchemy in this very intimate, very personal way that then, of course, we cannot transform in a vacuum. The alchemist, through their own process of transformation, must inherently enact transformation on the world. And I think that is, again, this is a whole other podcast episode about fallacies of the personal development and healing world. It's that this hyper individualism, we must recognize that the work that we're doing for ourselves inherently translates beyond us, and to anchor in these frequencies of healing and well-being.
Yes.
And it is impossible to heal ourselves without sharing healing, and impossible to transform ourselves without transforming our lives and the world around us.
Yeah. And to your point, I think the aspect of even raising your consciousness can have a downstream effect, right? So you can help others through that as well. But it's
Definitely.
very interesting that you talked about the intimate involvement of the alchemist and contemplation, because as we're again trying to draw parallels to personal transformation, that is the process. You have to meditate and sit on it. And as you were sharing that, I'm reflecting on my own personal journey, where if I'm working through something difficult that's coming up, I have to meditate on it and work through it. And sometimes I just get more awareness around what are the things that I'm still doing that are holding me back, and what are some of the things that I need to change in order to serve myself and my growth. So I definitely see a lot of those parallels.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So then,
Yeah.
the other question I had was around the resistance piece, because again, using myself as an example, there are times where I will resist change, and sometimes it's on a subconscious level. So how do people then navigate that? And for me, as a therapist, I'll often ask people to just be compassionate with themselves and have patience. Sometimes you're not ready for that change. That's okay. But you have to be honest with yourself that maybe right now is not the time, rather than saying, oh, yeah, I'm doing the change. Right. And so just being really honest and real and working through it, because there isn't really a specific deadline around healing.
Yeah.
It's a process in itself, and it's a journey. So just wanting thoughts around that resistance piece.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that in, because this is something that I inevitably help my students work through in this process, and even my clients who are not in this year-long training. This is something that we talk about, of resistance and fear around transformation. This is very real. This is again a thing that I think a lot of people butt up against. You also asked previously about, like, how does this translate into the personal process? And I'll tell you something that I've heard pretty universally from my alchemy students who are in this 200-hour training is, oh my gosh, understanding the process of alchemy. Like, and so we can go into this later if this is helpful, but there are these very logical 7 stages of alchemy that are these very universal processes that people inevitably go through the process of change. And I've heard from my students this mind-blowing, oh my gosh, now that I get how it works. And I usually hear this more than halfway through the course. After we've been in it for a while, it's like this light bulb clicks on, and they say, I get it. The beginning was really hard, and I get why I had to go through that. And now that I'm a little over halfway through, it makes so much sense. And I can look back on my trajectory. And then hearing also from my students about who graduated a year or a few years ago, saying, my life is so different now in the way that I approach change, because I understand how it works and because I can apply the principles of alchemy. So I say that I'm halfway through my 5th cohort of students right now. I've heard it from several cohorts about, like, this does help people transcend that fear, because it teaches you the process. And it actually is a very logical, very practical process that and it's based again in universal law. So there are other things in the world that abide by this same cycle. And right now, here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're heading into winter, and we're in early winter, actually. Looking outside, the leaves are dropping or mostly dropped. The daylight is getting a lot shorter. It's getting colder. We're heading into this cycle of rest and the sacred pause. And we know inevitably the days are going to get longer again, and the flowers will bloom and the leaves will bud out again, and then the fruit. And then next fall, everything will turn orange and yellow and fall again. So we know, and just like the rising and the setting of the sun, the waxing and the waning of the moon, people, this is everywhere. So we have all of this evidence that rebirth does come. The sun always rises, but it is preceded by death. It is always preceded by loss. And when you talk about the resistance, I think people are very afraid of loss because of its inherent uncertainty. People are afraid of, and part of this is our own human neurology of we are wired for loss aversion. This is something that we have spent thousands upon thousands of years hammering into our own brains and nervous systems about choose that which is familiar, even if it's not totally perfect, over that which is unfamiliar and inherently unpredictable and therefore probably more dangerous. This is part of our own neurobiology. So now, as these modern Western humans living in a world where, okay, say you're in a job that you hate and you feel like it's killing your soul a little bit, right? Or you're in a relationship that you know isn't the right thing, but you like them well enough, but it's not right. Or even you love them, you want different things, or whatever the case may be. Or I don't know, you're in a home that just, it's got mold toxicity and it's not good, but the housing market sucks. Pick your favorite on, I'm in a situation that isn't right. And I want to do something different, but I don't know how, and I'm afraid, right? This is a very universal experience. We've all been there. Raise your hand, people. Yep, me too. Okay. And I say this again, having really leaned into and embraced this process now, I approach change and transformation in my life very differently than I used to. And that is by virtue of my hard-won, deep initiations into the challenge of sticking with what doesn't work. And I have been through, again, some very uncomfortable experiences of resisting change until it slapped me in the face. And now I tell my students, choose change before change chooses you. Because we all know what that's like. For Khan, I'm guessing you know what this is like too. We hear the whisper and we know, okay, this isn't right. You need to do something else. But we don't because we're afraid. And then it gets louder. Hey, you know this isn't right. Do something else. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm not really sure what to do. And then slap. Okay. So when we know how transformation works and we understand, yes, things will probably be uncomfortable initially. This is logically what happens because I know the 7 stages of alchemy. I know that there are these death stages, and then it goes through this process of purification, and then there is rebirth. When we know this happens, it makes it so much easier to enter into the uncertainty. Because we're trusting in something bigger than ourselves. And going back to, Furkan, what you mentioned at the very beginning, this like spiritual transmission aspect, like we are trusting in the architecture of life all around us. We are trusting in the same forces that make the leaves fall and the flowers bloom again.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You have to let some of those parts of yourself die to give birth to those newer. And I look at it as not only opportunity, but the growth in itself is beautiful. And it's all about perspective. But sometimes you have to trust the process, as cliche as it may sound. But the other piece I wanted to understand from your perspective was even on the journey of growth, you may choose change, but things will continue to get harder, which I think is part of that journey too. That pressure you feel, the friction you feel. And you may start questioning it at times. Like, I wish I didn't have this level of awareness because this is really hard. But again, this is part of that transformation, and it's only demonstrating to you that, hey, you're on this path here. And yes, things are difficult, but how bad do you want it? And I think that's how I look at it at times. Or I also have to look at it in the sense that if I hadn't chosen this path, then I wouldn't be tested in this way at times. So it is a blessing in a way, but it takes a lot of working through, right? Because you will tend to feel bad, or you may beat yourself up at times, but ultimately it's being able to shift that perspective and having the gratitude for getting this experience handed to you
Yeah.
at times. Again, just want to get your thoughts around some of that as well.
I think you're hitting on a really important piece there in the false promise of personal healing work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what I mean when I say
Yes.
that. Like the idea that, oh, if you enter into the journey of healing or personal development or spirituality, whatever the case may be, your life is going to be sunshine and rainbows and you'll have a bunch of money and live in a beautiful home with your hot spouse and whatever, right?
Yeah.
There is this false promise. People, hopefully, if you've been hanging around here long enough, like, you know, that's not the case. And for those of you who haven't yet been disabused of that and that illusion, I'm sorry to be the one to say that. Here's the piece. I think about it through the lens of like our own evolution of maturity. Imagine an infant. And this also, there's this philosophy of nourishment that I believe it's been a while since I heard where this came from. I believe it's Tibetan Buddhism, so imagine a little baby.
Mhm.
And this little baby has everything provided for them. Their life is, they just drink milk and sleep and they get snuggles. Like that is, it's a very comfortable, very cushy, nothing is wrong life. Of course, in the ideal scenario where they are well loved and cared for.
Mhm.
And this philosophy of nourishment calls this, you know, the milk level of nourishment. And of course, we can apply these levels of nourishment to ourselves as adults as well. And so the milk level of nourishment means that we are nourished by things that are very rich, very easy. You know, milk is full of sugar and fat. It's very like nothing challenging there. We are only nourished by things that are beautiful and lovely and great. And that's inherently a very immature state of being. And then the next layer of nourishment is called the meat layer of nourishment. And that's where, okay, you got to chew a little more. It's still good nourishment. It's protein, but you have to work at it and you might have to like cut it into little pieces.
Mhm.
And there are plenty of people in the world who are at the meat level of nourishment of this is for kind of a little bit what you're talking about of like, okay, I'm challenged. I can do hard things. Like I'm
Mhm.
proving to myself I can study for this exam and then do well, or I can go out and audition for the play and try out for the sports team and or apply for that job, whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
And it's okay if I don't get it all the time, but I can do hard things. That's the meat level of nourishment. And then in our like life trajectory, we can make this analogy of, okay, you're like a child to like a teenager, right? There are plenty of people in the world who do not progress beyond that level of
Mhm.
nourishment. And I think this is where we start to get into the next layer, and there are 4 within this particular system. The next layer is called the bone level of nourishment. And this is where we get into, okay, we've been on the path for a while, and we start to, or not start to, but we continue to
Oh.
confront really challenging things. We're confronting our own personal developmental trauma and also our ancestral trauma and then also societal. And it starts to get bigger and bigger. And it's, wait, aren't I supposed to be happy and rich by now? There's again the false promise.
Mhm.
But this is the bone level of nourishment where a bone is not easy to eat. You gotta
Mhm.
like boil it down and you have to work a lot in order to actually receive nourishment from that. And the same is true in our spiritual trajectory and our healing
Mhm.
trajectory.
Mhm.
They're like, it's hard. It's really hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you.
Yeah.
When you get into, you're on this path for long enough, you are confronted with deeply challenging things.
Mhm.
And sure, there are moments where I would at times be like, gosh, if I had gone a different trajectory, I could be like drinking a cocktail and ordering shit on Amazon right now and just be like dumb and happy.
Yeah.
But I chose something different and I chose to be present with
Mhm.
things that are hard.
Yes.
And I can be nourished by that. And then
Yeah.
the final level is called the marrow level of nourishment. And of course, this is ignoring the fact that marrow is actually very nourishing, right? This is for our analogy here. The marrow level of nourishment is that you are nourished even by death or
Mm.
even by the most challenging initiation rite of passage. You are nourished by that. And this is again, and within this particular aspect. There's a lot of studies, and Tibetan Buddhism, and this is not the only one that does this, but trains people for the process of remaining lucid through leaving their bodies, and trains people through that process of maintaining utmost consciousness and lucidity through these challenging rites of passage. So we have this arc of maturity in our healing and transformation. And I do believe that we get hooked in. I'm not sure if people get hooked, like I've joked a while ago of Spirit has a really great marketing team because they show new people all the fun stuff. It's, oh, here's the beautiful visions and here's your spirit guides. And people get invested when it's fun, and then it starts to get hard, but people are still invested because they're like, okay, there's beauty here. And of course there is beauty here. There's incredible beauty and incredible love and incredible, very powerful, very exciting and fun, nourishing spiritual experiences amidst the very challenging parts.
Yes.
And I've been on this path for a long time. I've been in this world for over 20 years now, and I'm sold. I'm here to stay.
Yes.
And I can tell you now, from a couple of decades of spiritual practice, there is beauty there, and it's totally worth sticking around. And then you get better and more skilled at being able to be present with the challenging pieces.
Yes.
And I think this is also where we start to get beyond the I am, like me, my trauma, my stuff, into societal and collective healing, which is where, and people are going to engage with this in different ways. Not everyone's going to be a practitioner. Not everyone's going to be a therapist or body worker, healer, acupuncturist, like a social worker, right? I have a lot of my clients are those people. And I also have people who work in academia, who work in law, who work in real estate, all sorts of things. And it doesn't matter what the thing is that you're doing. We can still anchor in these principles of well-being in our personal lives, how we're interacting with people, and then bringing these paradigms of health and being and care and compassion to no matter what your field is. You don't have to quit your job and become a healer in order to anchor in these mysteries. And we need people who are not working within this field. We need people who are like in government, in academia, in all the ways in the world, who are anchored into their own healing and transformation and helping other people who may not be ready to come in through the door of therapy or shamanism, but they still need that door to be open for them.
Yes, for sure. And as you were sharing that, I wanted to also share something a mentor of mine that I work with mentioned. She's saying we get fixated on, or we may misunderstand and look at it as healed rather than healing. That is a continuous process, right? So just even that little shift in understanding can allow us to have a different perspective. And one of the things that we've been talking about here is, as you continue on that journey, like the layers or the veils of the ego start diminishing. And that's where you really experience that beauty. And that's in my personal experience too, because then every obstacle in the moment, it may seem like one, is an opportunity for growth. And I may not get it right. I may stumble through it, but ultimately it's taking a step back and recognizing, okay, this is an opportunity, and what can I learn from this? And how can I navigate this with an open mind and some humility that I'm not going to get it right? And that's okay, because I'll be better prepared for the next one. So that's the goal. So I appreciate you sharing and getting into that layer of the metaphor of the nourishment as well. But we've touched on this a few times. So I think it's important to help us, if you can help us walk through the 7 stages of alchemy.
Absolutely.
And then if there's any other things that come up from there, I'll definitely ask the questions.
Fantastic. Yes. Okay, let's do it, people. And I'm going to give you some alchemical terms. So my invitation is let it wash over you. And then if anyone wants to go deeper, I do have a free guide to the 7 stages of alchemy that you can download from my website. That'll be in the show notes. And that has it goes a little deeper than what I'm going to do here, because it also identifies where people tend to get stuck. It helps you figure out where you are in the stages and then give supportive practices and exercises to do for each stage. So go check out in the show notes and download that for yourself. But for right now, we have the process of alchemy that I've referenced several times, and it is divided into 3 phases, which are further subdivided into 7 stages. So the 3 phases of alchemy that I've already referenced are death, purification, and rebirth.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, alchemy begins with death. Transformation inherently begins with loss. So that's exactly what we're talking about in the whole resistance and aversion piece, is people recognize that, okay, there's something that I have to let go of, and I don't know what's going to be on the other side, but yes, you got to let it go. So we begin with the first stage of alchemy. It's called calcination. And this means to take down to the bone. And this is the loss and death of physical structures. Practically in our lives, this might look like losing a loved one, losing your job, quitting your job, ending a relationship. Even cleaning out your closet can be a calcination activity, because you're getting rid of stuff. You're getting rid of physical structures, maybe outfits or jewelry or furniture, cleaning out your house that doesn't fit you anymore or doesn't fit your current identity structure. So there is removal of physical structures from your life. And again, this is a piece that people are really resistant to generally, of, okay, if I quit my job, am I going to be able to get another one? If I end this relationship, will anyone ever love me again? This is part of the natural inquiry here. The stage 2 of alchemy is called dissolution, like dissolving. And this is the loss and death of energetic and emotional structures. This is where people do a lot of grief work and a lot of identity belief work, and getting rid of, okay, here's the etheric structure, my identity structure of who I used to be, working with emotional, okay, so you quit your job, and on one hand, you're really happy because you didn't like it. And on the other hand, there's a lot of fear and a lot of grieving there, because there were some parts that you really enjoyed. So you're sorting through, you're navigating that mourning, that reconciliation process internally. Alchemy is called separation. And this is where most people think transformation actually starts. Interesting side note, when I ask people, how do you think transformation works? They usually say something like, oh, I think about where I want to go, or like what changes I want to make, and I make a vision board, and they go straight to analysis. They go straight to the mind. And there is a place for this, but this is not where transformation actually starts. Like we learned, it starts with death, but people jump right to the thinking and the mind. And this is stage 3. Separation is where we work in analysis, perspective, and discernment. So we get to sort out, okay, what did I like about my old job that I'd like to make sure I do again? What did I really hate that I never ever want to do again? What about that relationship that I ended? What of that was really great that I'm holding on to as hard-won personal gain and evolution of my character? And what did I really love and appreciate about that partner that I would ideally like to have in a future partnership? And also, what am I not ever wanting to have again? What are my new boundaries as a result? So this is the evaluation, discernment, sorting, make a vision board, make your pros and cons list stage. And a lot of people like to hang out there. Okay, so this is where people usually come in and they like to hang out, because the following stage is called conjunction. This is stage 4. And this is where we put things together in a new way. This is the initial form. Okay, so in our lives, this might look like, okay, you're rewriting your resume. You maybe start applying for jobs. You might make a new dating profile or go on some dates. Or maybe you write a book, right? This is the first draft of your book, people. This is not the final draft. Do not confuse the first draft for the final draft. This is another pitfall that people stumble into here, is they confuse this for the final version. And then we get into stage 5, which is called fermentation. And this is the sit, wait, and let it reanimate stage. And in the example of, okay, you start writing a book and people, okay, it's not the first draft isn't the final version. What's the thing that people want to do right away that they absolutely should not? Right. You should actually just let it sit, because then when you walk away, you have this internal process of, like, you get this infusion of energy. This is called the spiritization. You're receiving this animating force that then you go back and you see your book with fresh eyes, and you can help it bring it to its actualization. Right.
Yeah. And do you find this stage is also where you need a little bit more clarity? So I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you may have this tendency to jump into another relationship where you may not have had full clarity, or jump into a job without fully evaluating what's going to serve you. Is that fair?
That's ideally. So here's the thing is, ideally we address that in stage 3.
Okay.
Ideally. But you identified one of the other pitfalls that people can jump into is if they rush through or skip over, then they might get into stage 5 and realize, oh crap, I'm still living that old pattern. I have to go back. to where I was previously. So ideally, you're going to smooth sail right through here. And also, I'm describing these in a very linear way.
Yes.
People don't necessarily experience it like that.
Right.
Like there might be a little more jumping around, or you can be in 2 stages at once. Yeah. So just keep in mind, it's very logical, but it's not necessarily going to actually go like that in your life.
Yes.
But for the example that you gave about a new relationship, so the fermentation stage, again, is that spiritization. It's receiving the animating force. So let's say you did go through all the stages and you did your work of parsing out and figuring out what you want. And then in conjunction, again, that's that first form stage, you start dating. And everybody knows the feeling of going from dating to being in a relationship. There's that new energy that comes in of, oh, there's a thing here. And it's love, it's connection. Right. So that's that animating force, that spiritizing force that comes in and gives this thing life. Right. Or your book goes from just being like a good story, words on a page, to the characters really come to life and have this animate energy. Or you start a new job and you go from just being like the new person at your job trying to figure it out to, oh, I'm excited and I feel connected and I'm enjoying it and I know what I'm doing. So there's that shift and everybody knows what that feels like. Or like you move into a new house and at some point you're like, oh, I feel at home here. That's that shift. And then the 6th stage of alchemy is called distillation. And this is where we clarify the essence. So we can look at chemical distillation, for example, and it's a process of evaporating and condensing a substance over and over to get a very pure, very concentrated substance. And so we can do that with our own energy. It's this crystallizing of the essence. And so in our examples, your relationship, your new relationship where you fall in love with your new partner, you go through some trials and challenges as a couple and you come really strongly into, oh, this is who we are as a couple. Or your job, you're like, okay, now I've been through a few assignments. I feel really clear, really concentrated in the essence of this aspect of my identity. And the 7th stage of alchemy is called coagulation. This is the actualization. This is the gold of the process where you come into the full radiant illuminated expression of this identity of whatever that case may be. And we shine it out in the world. And this is where mythologically the philosopher's stone is said to be able to turn any metal into gold and to create the elixir of life. And I look at that in the case where we become the philosopher's stone as, oh, we can translate this radiance into other beings around us. We can share, we can turn any metal into gold, meaning we can inspire transformation in others. We can share the radiance of our own healing, and we can create the elixir of life, the elixir of immortality, by supporting and taking a stand for life all around us, life in other beings, life on the life of the earth herself.
Thank you for walking us through that in such detail. I appreciate the fact that there is more to it. We'll definitely share some of the resources listeners can find, but thank you for that. And one of the things that come up for me as you were sharing that is this is an ongoing thing, right? You may have a relationship where you need to go through this, but there could be other aspects of your life where you may need to go through this as you continue to evolve or age throughout life.
Yes. Because after coagulation, you prepare to go through the cycle again.
Yes.
And you can be at different points in this cycle in different areas of your life. Say, for example, your relationship is really great and healthy and happy and you're very fulfilled, but you hate your job, right? So you might be in a coagulation state in your relationship and in calcination in your job, right? Or vice versa, or whatever the case may be. So this is, again, like when you understand the map, this is the roadmap to how transformation actually works. This is where once you know what these stages are, and this is what my students find, is we go through the stages and throughout the course of the year, again, we do it on a very arbitrary timeline where we spend about 7 weeks in each stage. But that's so that and this isn't how they're actually experiencing it in their life. This is so that they can cultivate a relationship with the energies of the stage, learn the specific practices and techniques and healing philosophy and all the associated energies of each stage, so that when they come into this in their lives, or in the case of my students who are practitioners, when they're supporting other people in that, then they have this whole suite of tools to draw upon and context to understand. So then they can say, all right, I'm really wanting to make a change in my career. how do I support myself in the best way to, okay, I'm at this stage in alchemy. I know that these are the practices I need to do to help me stabilize and regulate my nervous system because I'm kind of nervous, that resistance that you're talking about for con. So we do stabilization and regulation practices. And then we also do practices to help shake up and clear energy, clearing hidden trapped emotion, and also like move into the next stage. So we're processing the emotional being as well. And we're making plans for how we're, so because you have this map, you can participate really actively rather than feeling like you're being dragged behind the car and change is driving the car like, haha, let's go. You get to be in the car also steering and figuring out where you want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you for this conversation and sharing so much wisdom with us today. I really appreciate it. Now, I know you've touched on resources. So what are some ways listeners can find your work or some of the tools and resources you've already talked about if they wanted to get more?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. You can find me through my website, michellehawk.com. That's Michelle, Michele, hawk like the bird.com. And you can also download that free guide that I talked about to the 7 stages of alchemy. That'll be in the show notes as well. And that'll help you identify where you are, where you might be stuck in the cycle of transformation, and then supportive practices to help you move through that. If you are interested in the 200-hour alchemy certification training, I'm currently taking applications for that for next year's cohort. And that is, again, a deep dive year-long apprenticeship into the mystery school of alchemy, learning tools and techniques and practices for your own personal transformation, going through that crucible, and then also for people who are practitioners or therapists or want to add this to their body of work, then tools for how to do that and express that in the world. So it includes retreats. It's got experiential hands-on education. It's a cohort of really awesome students, plus a lot of support from me, a lot of one-on-one time with me. So it's a very thorough, wonderful deep dive support. And then I also have other resources. You can find my own podcast, which is called Shaman Sister Sessions. That's on YouTube and all the places that people listen to podcasts. So if you are called to the mysteries and you want to hear me talk more about shamanism and alchemy, mediumship, energy healing, energetic regulation, and mastery, then you can hear much more of that there.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the show notes so the listeners can find that. But thank you again for your time today. Very much appreciated. And like I said, I got to learn a lot, so I'm sure the listeners will as well. So thank you for all of that.
Oh, thank you so much thank you for inviting me to be here. And yes, to all of you listening, I hope this was valuable and helpful. Please feel free to drop me a line. You can reach out to me through my website. Let me know how you liked this episode.